Today, we're diving straight into the deep, frozen lore of Westeros. And listen, if you think you know exactly how the epic story of Ice and Fire ends just based on what played out on TV, you might want to rethink, well, pretty much everything. We're tearing into the actual source material to hunt down the true, ultimate threat to the realms of men. It is a journey that is absolutely going to challenge some of our most basic assumptions about how this world operates. Let's get into it. So I want to hook you right off the bat with a question. We are so conditioned by modern fantasy to look for a Dark Lord, right? A literal icy overlord leading an endless army of the dead. But what if we've been looking in the completely wrong direction this whole time? What if the true villain isn't a person, a king, or a general at all, but something far more ancient, silent, and deeply rooted in the frozen earth? Like a tree. To fully grasp this, we've got to establish what we actually know about the White Walkers in the text. According to the deepest lore, they come from the land of always winter, way, way beyond the wall, and they are a profoundly non-human race, practically alien to the realms of men. They even speak their own distinct language called Scroth. George R. R. Martin describes it as sounding like the cracking of ice on a winter lake. So these aren't just mindless zombies. They are an incredibly ancient, terrifying species. Now, we all remember the television adaptation, where this sprawling, ancient threat was basically boiled down to one singular controlling entity, the Night King. It leans super heavily on that classic sci-fi mothership trope. You kill the guy at the top, and the entire army of the dead instantly shatters into dust. It was a narrative choice that gave the heroes a very convenient, hyper-focused bad guy to defeat in a traditional battlefield showdown. But here's where we uncover a massive fandom misconception that has honestly skewed theories for years. That singular Night King leading the others in the present day, he simply does not exist in the books. Readers have spent years furiously debating which modern character is going to take up the mantle of the White Walker leader, completely missing the fact that the author has explicitly stated the show's villain and the book's lore figure are two completely different things. In the written text, the Night's King, and notice the apostrophe S there, is strictly a historical figure. He was the infamous 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch who made, let's be honest, the ultimate bad dating choice. Lore tells us he allegedly bedded a pale, cold sorceress, gave her his soul, and brought her back to the Night Fort. For 13 long years, they ruled together, committing unspeakable magical atrocities before an alliance between the Starks and the Wildlings finally took them down. He is long dead and buried. And this historical reality really highlights three major mistakes readers make. They look at morally gray characters like Stannis Baratheon, or the downright villainous Euron Greyjoy, or even our tragic hero Jon Snow, and they try to predict which of them is going to turn evil and take the icy crown. But they're relying on a fundamentally conflated timeline, the complete myth that the historical king was otherized or turned into an ice creature, and the totally false assumption that the narrative even demands a reborn king to lead the dead today. When you actually map out the timeline, the conflation completely falls apart. Look at the strict order of events. The White Walkers did their absolute maximum damage during the original Long Night, right? They nearly wiped out humanity. And that catastrophic event happened centuries before the 13th Lord Commander was even born, which proves a critical, undeniable point. The White Walkers do not need a king to lead them. They function just fine on their own, nearly conquering the world without a singular Dark Lord pulling the strings. On top of that, there is zero textual evidence that the historical Night's King was ever physically transformed into a White Walker. So why on earth do we expect a modern character to undergo this sci-fi transformation? Some folks firmly believe Jon Snow is destined to become this new Night's King. Yet, if you look closely at Jon's arc, he consistently declines choices that would give him absolute power, like when he definitively refused Stannis' offer to make him a legitimized Stark. The narrative simply doesn't support a reborn Dark leader waiting in the wings. The crucial underlying point here is that Westerosi history is written by highly unreliable narrators. We essentially have two main sources for this legend. On one hand, you've got Old Nan's fireside folktales heavily embellishing the magical evils, portraying the queen as a literal female White Walker. On the other hand, Maester Yandal's official Citadel record strips the magic away entirely, saying she was just a human sorceress from the Barrowlands. George R. R. Martin gave us these conflicting accounts intentionally. They aren't a predictive roadmap for the future, they are a historical puzzle meant to keep us guessing. Okay, so if we eliminate the persistent myth of a singular icy general calling the shots, we are left with a massive, terrifying mystery.
If there is no overarching king dictating their every move, where do the White Walkers actually draw their immense power from? What is the ancient, untamed engine driving this supernatural cold across the continent?
And that brings us to a frankly mind-blowing theory tucked deep within the most dedicated fandom discussions. The true source of the threat is something called the Heart of Winter. Glimpsed only briefly in Bran Stark's terrifying early visions where he looks deep into the absolute north, this is theorized to be a massive, ancient, and deeply corrupted weirwood tree, hidden in the furthest reaches of the frozen wastes. The theory suggests it was intentionally corrupted by the greenseers of the Children of the Forest millennia ago, basically designed to birth the others as the ultimate biological weapon against humanity. To grasp the sheer scale and stakes of this theory, we really have to look at the grand balance of magic in this world. On one side, you have the deeply rooted cold ice and earth magic of the north. That encompasses the White Walkers, obviously, but it fundamentally also includes greensight and warging. On the flip side, you have the highly volatile, consuming fire magic of the east, characterized by dragons, glass candles, and the fanatical followers of the Lord of Light. These two primal forces are intrinsically linked to their respective power sources, and to see how this works, we just have to look at how fire magic recently woke up. Seriously, just look at the literal domino effect happening on the fire side of the equation. Before Daenerys hatched her dragons in the Dothraki Sea, fire magic was virtually non-existent. I mean, the most skilled fire mages in Karth could barely light a glass candle. But the birth of those three dragons acted as a massive global catalyst. It instantly supercharged fire magic worldwide, awakening ancient relics and drastically amplifying the destructive power of the alchemist's wildfire in King's Landing. Fire magic is firmly anchored to those dragons. So the climax of this Heart of Winter theory suggests a profoundly desperate endgame. To finally end the unnatural creeping winters, greenseers like Bran and Bloodraven are going to have to guide Daenerys and her fully grown dragons to the far north. Their desperate mission? To fly deep into the unforgiving frozen wastes and literally incinerate this massive corrupted weirwood, the true heart of winter, using concentrated, continuous dragonfire. But man, this potential victory comes at an apocalyptic cost. It's the ultimate fantasy scenario of mutually assured destruction. Destroying the Heart of Winter wouldn't just kill the White Walkers and shatter their armies of whites. It would forcefully eradicate all ice and earth magic entirely. The ancient, continent-spanning weirwood network would die, greensight would vanish from the world forever, and skin changers would feel their deeply personal bonds to their animals violently and permanently severed. And the tragedy actually goes even deeper when you dig into the lore. As one reader really insightfully pointed out in the source discussions, the weirwood network isn't just a conduit for magic. It's the literal, tangible afterlife for the Children of the Forest. When their physical bodies die, their consciousness seamlessly enters the trees, to live on in a massive hive mind. So destroying this network would essentially mean committing permanent spiritual genocide against the indigenous people of Westeros. If this catastrophic event actually plays out, the delicate magical balance of the world shatters completely. Think about it. With ice magic totally eradicated and the threat of the long winters definitively ended, Daenerys Targaryen and her dragons would be left standing as the sole, unchallenged magical superpower in the known world. It would be a complete monopoly on weapons of mass destruction, with literally nothing left in the natural order to counter her fire. But we really have to remember the author's core philosophy when reading these texts. George R.R. Martin doesn't write fairy tales of pure good versus pure evil. In his complex universe, the Song of Fire is not inherently good or righteous, and the Song of Ice is not inherently evil. Both are fiercely destructive, primal forces that have a vital part to play in the natural balance of the known world. Letting one completely consume the other spells total disaster. Because an unchecked, fire-dominated world wouldn't exactly be a tropical paradise. The Red Priests constantly preach about a summer without end, which sounds great, right? Until you realize it means a literal, unending summer. Without winter snows to melt and properly feed the earth, vital crops dry up, great rivers turn to dust, aquatic ecosystems completely collapse. It would quickly usher in widespread global famine and relentless sweltering heat. It's a totally different but equally agonizing kind of apocalypse. So, I will leave you with this provocative puzzle to ponder. If Daenerys destroys the Heart of Winter and all ice magic is permanently eradicated to save the world, have they really won? Or will the resulting unending summer and the completely unchecked dominance of fire be the very thing that ultimately kills Westeros?